Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting, if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. The Time of Reckoning. Episode 6. Chapter 39 to 49. Cold metal vibrated against my cheek. A car roared past. How's his blood sugar? A distant woman's voice. Margaret. Low. A man's voice, closer. Russell. Very low. I can give him a glucose shot, but we really should do that. Derek. Simon's voice now, the name coming out as a moan. My eyes fluttered open. We were lying on the floor of a van. Simon was a few feet from me, still asleep, face screwed up, like he was in pain. And give him more sedative, Margaret called back from the driver's seat. I don't want them waking up. He really shouldn't get too much. Just do it. I closed my eyes to slits, so they wouldn't realize I was awake. I tried to look around without moving my head, but all I could see was Simon and, over his head, Tori's sneaker. Derek. Where is? My eyelids closed again. The van stopped moving. Cold air rushed over me, exhaust fumes blasting in. The engine rumbled, then died. Another rumble, like a closing garage door. The wind disappeared and everything went dark. Then a light flicked on. Simon retched beside me. The stink of vomit filled the van. I pried my eyes open to see him, sitting, supported by Russell, who held a plastic bag for him. Simon. My voice came out thick. He turned. His eyes met mine and struggled to focus. His lips parted and he rasped, "You're okay," then he gagged and hunched back over the vomit bag. "What did you give him?" a man's voice snapped. I knew that voice. Cool fingers wrapped around my bare arm. I looked up. Dr. Davidoff's face hovered above mine. "It's all right, Chloe." He smiled. "You're home." A guard rolled me through the halls in a wheelchair, my arms and legs strapped down. Tori rode beside me, also restrained, pushed by another guard. "It's a temporary measure," Dr. Davidoff had assured me when the guard bound me to the chair. "We don't want to sedate you again, so this is our only alternative until you've had time to reacclimatize." Dr. Davidoff walked between the guards. Behind them, Margaret and Russell walked as they talked to Tori's mom, who hadn't said a word to her daughter since we'd arrived. "We decided this was the best place for them," Margaret was saying. "They need a level of control and supervision that we just can't provide. Your compassion and consideration are overwhelming," Diane Enright said. "And where did you want us to deposit your finder's fee again?" I could feel the chill in Margaret's tone when she answered. "You have the account number." "We aren't leaving until we've confirmed the deposit," Russell chimed in. "And if you get any ideas about not paying us, I'm sure you've taken precautions against just such a possibility," Mrs. Enright said drily. "A letter to be opened in the event of your sudden disappearance, exposing us all." "No," Margaret said. "Just someone waiting for our call. A colleague with a direct line to the Nast Cabal and all the details of your operation." "I'm sure Mr. St. Cloud wouldn't want that." Dr. Davidoff only chuckled. "Threatening a cabal with a cabal? Clever. But that won't be necessary." The good humor drained from his voice. "Whatever Mr. St. Cloud's interest in our organization, we remain an independent operation, meaning we do not operate under the auspices of his cabal. You made a deal with us, a sizable payment in return for our subjects and the disbanding of your little rebel group. You have earned that payment and you will get it without treachery or threat of violence. He glanced back at them. However, considering it is, ultimately, Mr. St. Cloud's money that is paying you, I would suggest that when you leave the safety of our walls, you get as far away as you can, as fast as you can. When Tori's mom led Margaret and Russell away, I asked about Simon. I hated giving Dr. Davidoff the satisfaction of hearing the tremor in my voice, but I had to know. I'm taking you to see him now, Chloe, he said in that condescending fake cheerful tone I knew too well. Look how good we are to you, it said. And look how you treat us. We only want to help. My fingernails dug into the arms of my wheelchair. Dr. Davidoff strode ahead and opened a door. We went up a ramp and found ourselves in an observation room overlooking an operating room. I looked down at the shining metal operating table and the trays of gleaming metal instruments, and I gripped the chair tighter. A woman was in the room, off to the side of the observation window, so I could only make out a slender arm in a lab coat. The door to the operating room opened, and a gray-haired woman entered. It was Sue, the nurse I'd met last time I was here. She wheeled a gurney. Simon lay on it, strapped down. No. I flung myself against the restraints. Dr. Davidoff chuckled. I don't even want to know what you think we have in mind, Chloe. We're bringing Simon in to hook him up to N4. Being diabetic, he's easily dehydrated by vomiting. We don't want to take any chances, not while that sedative is still upsetting his stomach. I said nothing, just stared down at Simon, my heart thumping. It's a precaution, Chloe. And what you're looking at is simply our medical room. Yes, it's equipped for surgery, but only because it's a multi-purpose room. He bent and whispered. If you look closely, I bet you'll see dust on those instruments. He winked, the genial uncle humoring the silly little girl, and I don't know what I wanted to do, but something in my expression made him flinch and just for a second, that genial uncle vanished. I wasn't the docile little Chloe he remembered. It would be safer if I was, but I couldn't fake it anymore. He straightened and cleared his throat. Now, if you'll look down there again, Chloe, I believe you'll see someone else you recognize. I turned toward Simon, still lying on the gurney, pale as the sheet pulled over him. He was listening to the woman in the lab coat, but I could only see her from the back. She was slender, below average height, with blonde hair. And it was that hair, the way it swung as she leaned over Simon, that made my breath catch. Dr. Davidoff rapped on the window. The doctor looked up. It was Aunt Lauren. She shaded her eyes, like she couldn't see anyone through the tinted glass. Then she turned back to Simon, talking as he nodded. Your aunt made a mistake, Dr. Davidoff said. You were so upset when we brought you here that she panicked. She was under a lot of stress and she made some bad decisions. She sees that now. We understand and we've forgiven her. She's a welcome member of the team once again. As you can see, she's back to work, happy and healthy, not chained in a dungeon or whatever horrible fate you'd imagined befalling her. He looked down at me. We aren't monsters, Chloe. So where's Rachel? Tori's voice made me jump. Her chair was next to mine, but I'd forgotten she was here. She's up next on the Happy Friends reunion tour, I suppose. When Dr. Davidoff said nothing, the sneer fell from Tori's face. Where's Ray? I asked. She is here, right? She's been transferred, he said. Transferred? He forced a jovial note into his voice. Yes. This laboratory is hardly the place for a 16-year-old girl to live. It was only temporary lodgings, which we would have explained if you'd stayed long enough to let us. Rachel has been moved to, he chuckled. I won't call it a group home because, I assure you, it's a far cry from Lyle House. More like a boarding school. A very special boarding school, just for supernaturals. Let me guess, Tori said. You can only get to it by a magical train. How stupid do you think we are? We don't think you're stupid at all. We think you're special. There are people, as you've discovered, who think special means dangerous, which is why we've designed a school for your education and protection. Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, I said. He smiled at me, completely missing the edge in my voice. Exactly, Chloe. Tori twisted to look at him. And if we're all very, very good, we'll get to go there and live with Ray and Liz and Brady. Is Amber there, too? As a matter of fact. Liar. The venom in Tori's voice made him flinch. The empty chairs rattled and the guards glanced over at them, and fingered their sidearms. I barely noticed. All I could think was, Ray. No, please, not Ray. Liz is dead, Tori said. We've met her ghost, seen her throwing stuff, using her powers. Even my mother saw it. She knew it was Liz. Or didn't she mention that? Dr. Davidoff unclipped his pager and pressed a button, undoubtedly summoning Tori's mom, while using the delay to find the right expression: regret and sadness. I wasn't aware you knew the truth about Liz, he said carefully. Yes, I admit it. There was an accident the night we brought her in from Lyle House. We didn't tell any of you because you're all in a very fragile state. Do I look fragile? Tori said. Yes, Victoria, you do. You look angry and distraught and very vulnerable, and that's completely understandable if you think we killed your friend. But we didn't. What about Brady? I asked. Chloe saw his ghost, too, Tori said. Here. At the lab. He said he was brought in to talk to you, saw her Aunt Lauren, and then poof, game over. His gaze flicked from me to Tori, assessing the chances that Tori somehow had proof of Brady's death as well. Chloe was still experiencing after effects from her sedatives, he said. She had also been on a regime of drugs to keep her from seeing ghosts, either of which may have caused hallucinations. How did she hallucinate a boy she'd never met? Do you want her to describe him, because he sounded an awful lot like Brady to me? I'm sure Chloe saw a photo of him, whether she remembers it or not. Brady was close to Rachel. She probably described him. You have an explanation for everything, don't you? Tori said. Fine. Brady, Ray, and Amber are all living happily ever after in your super special boarding school. You want to calm us down? Get them on the phone. Better yet, set up a video conference. Don't tell me you can't do that, because I know Mom has the equipment. Yes, we do, and we will let you speak to them just as soon. Now. Tori roared. Sparks fizzled at her fingertips. The empty chairs wobbled. One crashed over backward. Her guard pulled out his sidearm. I want to see them now. Ray and Brady and Amber. You can want all you like, Miss Victoria. The door opened and Tori's mother walked in. But your wants no longer matter. You lost that right when you ran away. So you still recognize me, Mom? You. I thought maybe I'd changed so much that you'd forgotten who I was. Oh, I recognize you, Victoria. You're still the same spoiled princess who ran away from her responsibilities last week. Responsibilities? Tori's fists clenched and her restraints snapped open. My guard lunged forward, but Dr. Davidoff waved him back and motioned for the other to put away his gun. Tori got to her feet. Her hair bristled, popping and sparking. "Sedate her," Mrs. Enright snapped. "If she can't behave herself." "No, Diane," Dr. Davidoff said. "We need to learn how to handle Victoria's outbursts without resorting to medication. Now, Tori, I understand you're upset. Do you?" She wheeled. "Do you really? You locked me up at Lyle House and told me I was mentally ill. You shoved pills down my throat. You murdered my friend. You made me into this genetically modified freak, and yet you tell me it's my fault." She slammed her fists against her sides. Tiny bolts sparked off them, making her guard step forward. "Does that make you nervous?" she said. "That's nothing." She lifted her hands. A ball of energy spun between them, barely bigger than a pea at first, then growing and growing. "That's enough, Victoria," Dr. Davidoff said. "We know you're very powerful. You have no idea how powerful I am." She tossed the ball of energy in the air, where it spun, shooting sparks. "But I can show you." Behind Tori, her mother moved out of everyone's sight as they all stared at Tori. Mrs. Enright's lips moved in a spell. As I opened my mouth to warn Tori, a bolt shot from her mother's fingertips, whipping past Tori and hitting the advancing guard in the chest. The guard dropped. Dr. Davidoff, Mrs. Enright, and the other guard rushed to his side. "He's not breathing," the guard said. He looked up at Dr. Davidoff, eyes wide. "He's not breathing. Oh my God!" Mrs. Enright slowly turned to Tori. "What have you done?" Tori jumped, startled. "I didn't." "Get Dr. Fellows," Dr. Davidoff snapped to the other guard. Quickly. "I didn't do that," Tori said. "I didn't." "It was an accident," her mother murmured. "No, I did not do it. I swear to God." "She's right." Everyone looked up sharply at the sound of my voice. I twisted to face Mrs. Enright. "Tori didn't cast that spell." "You did. I saw you cast." A sudden smack against my cheek, like an invisible slap, so hard my wheelchair rolled back. Blood spurted from my nose. "Tori," Mrs. Enright said. "Stop that." "I didn't." Tori froze, caught in a binding spell. Mrs. Enright turned to Dr. Davidoff. "Now do you see what I mean? She's completely out of control. She lashes out at enemies and friends alike and she doesn't even realize she's doing it." "Restrain her," he said. "I'll take Chloe to her room." 40. And so, after a week on the run, I ended up exactly where I began. In the same cell. Lying on the same bed. Alone. Dr. Davidoff had hustled me out before Aunt Lauren came for the guard. I thought he might want her to check my bloodied nose, but he'd just brought me a wet cloth and a clean shirt from my closet at Lyle House, telling me I could see my aunt as soon as I was calm and ready to listen. As rewards went, spending quality time with my aunt who'd turned traitor again wasn't really the incentive he thought. For the past week, I'd dreamed of the day I'd come back here and rescue Aunt Lauren and Ray. Now I was here and there was no one to save. Aunt Lauren had returned to the fold. Ray was dead. I squeezed my eyes shut, but tears rolled down my cheeks anyway. I should have tried harder to persuade Ray to come with me. I should have come back for her sooner. Ray was dead. And Tori was next. Her mother had murdered that guard to frame her. I couldn't comprehend the evil of that, but I knew what it meant. Diane Enright wanted her daughter dead. She'd become a liability, a threat. Tora, I would die and I wouldn't be far behind. And what about Simon? And Derek? I wiped away the tears and sat up. I had two choices, escape or accept my fate. I wasn't accepting it. Not now, not ever. I took stock of my surroundings and what I could use. As for the room, nothing had changed. As for me, all I had were the clothes I wore, the new shirt and my jeans, still stained with Andrew's blood. I tried not to think about that. I patted my pockets, hoping for my ever-present switchblade. Gone. One pocket crackled, though. Paper. I tugged it out and unfolded it. When I remembered it was the picture Simon had made for Derek, I started to refold it, but I'd already seen what he'd drawn, a sketch of me, crouching beside a black wolf, my arm around its neck, and I remembered Simon saying give him that. And tell him it's okay. My eyes stung. I shakily refolded the message, and tucked it back into my pocket. Then I straightened and gave my head a sharp shake. I still had one very big trick up my sleeve. I pulled my legs up onto the bed, closed my eyes, and called the demi-demon. I'd barely finished summoning her when warm air tickled the top of my head. Well, whispered her tinkling voice, this looks very familiar. I need your help. Now that's new. And quite welcome, I might add. The first thing you need to do is free me. Then we'll rain down on all who have wronged us. I'll free you after you help me. And we'll skip the raining down part. Oh, but it's so much fun. All that fire and brimstone and rivers of lava. Demons beating their ragged wings and fanning the flames. A pause, then a deep sigh. Sarcasm is lost on the young and gullible, isn't it? I meant it figuratively. Wreak havoc, if you will. Smite our mutual enemies. No smiting. You're going to ruin all my fun, aren't you? Fine. Free me and after you help me. Details, details. I suppose you want to escape again. I'm not quite sure why, given that you seem rather fond of this place. You keep returning. I glared in her direction. Yes, I want your help escaping, but we're also going to free Simon and Tori and, if Derek's here, he comes, too. Presuming you mean the werewolf boy, he hasn't passed through those doors since he left years ago. But if they do bring him in, I will include him in the plan. I am nothing if not fair in my dealings with mortals. I'd seen enough demonic pact gone wrong horror movies to know I needed an ironclad agreement. The problem was that I didn't know exactly what I needed her to do. Get me out, sure. But how? Not surprisingly, she had an idea. Also not surprisingly, I didn't like it. Isn't there another way? There's always another way. Personally, I would prefer that witch Diane in right. I'm quite fond of witches, as I believe I've mentioned. True, she's still alive, but that's an obstacle easily overcome. Tell the guard you wish to speak to her and I'll guide you through the rest. Breaking her neck is the simplest method, but you are rather small for that, so. No. Then it's back to my original suggestion, isn't it? A minute later, I was kneeling on the carpet, doing something I'd sworn I'd never even consider. Return a human ghost to his corpse. Right now, though, it was the only way I could see to keep from becoming a corpse myself. I focused on the memory of his face, commanding him back. A little more, the demi-demon murmured. Yes, that's it. Now call him to you. I did. And I braced myself for screams. They're all in the meeting room, the demi-demon said, as if reading my mind. Just bring him quickly. A minute later, the card lock clicked. The door swung open. And there stood the guard Mrs. Enright had killed. Earlier, he'd just been the guard. I didn't know his name. Didn't want to. I'd had to struggle to recall his face for the summoning. He'd just been an anonymous minion of the Edison group. And now, when I desperately wanted to depersonalize him again, instead I saw a man. Young. Short brown hair. Freckles. Traces of acne on his cheeks. Was he much older than me? I swallowed, and made the mistake of lifting my eyes to his. Brown eyes, dark with rage and hate. I dropped my gaze. He still had the card key in his hand, raised, and I fixed on that. Another mistake. A wedding band sparkled on his finger. Oh God, he had a wife. Kids? A baby maybe? One who'd never see. I squeezed my eyes shut. You had nothing to do with his death. But I'd done something that felt just as bad. I'd brought him back to life. And when I glanced at his face, I saw how terrible that was, the hate, the fury, the disgust. Close the door, the demi-demon whispered. I did. The guard watched me, eyes narrowed, card still raised, like he'd love to shove it down my throat. Watch me choke on it. When he spoke, his words were garbled. Whatever you want me to do, I won't. The demi-demon chuckled. Then you don't know much about necromancers, particularly this one, she said, though he couldn't hear her. I don't want anything, I said. I'm sorry. Sorry. He spat the word and stepped toward me. His coat swung open, showing a charred hole in his chest. The stink of burned meat wafted out. I gagged, and my mouth filled with bile. He stepped toward me again. Stop, I said, voice quavering. He did, and stood there, skewering me with those burning eyes. I might suggest you take his gun, the demi-demon said. To be safe. I looked down. His fingers rested on the butt of his pistol. Don't move, I said. I tugged out the gun. You're going to use me to escape, aren't you? You won't. You belong in here. They were right. You're monsters. I hope they kill you all. He sneered down at me. No, actually, I hope they don't kill you. I hope they lock you up and experiment on you. Poke and prod and test until you wish you were dead. A week ago, I'd have shivered at those words. Today, I wasn't going to cower under his threats and name-calling, and I wasn't going to shy away from what I had to do. I told him to sit. He did. He had no choice. Then I freed his soul, envisioning not a release but an exchange. Eyes shut, I sat cross-legged, necklace on the floor, inches from my hand. I willed this to work. Please work. Just. Well, that's better, the guard said, his mumble replaced by a weirdly musical lilt. He cleared his throat. No, that's better, he said, in his normal voice. I snatched the necklace back. The guard gave a girlish laugh. His eyes glowed orange. He blinked and rolled his shoulders, then cleared his throat again and the laugh deepened. His eyes went black, then brown. Will I pass? The demi-demon asked from inside the guard's body. I picked up the gun from the floor. The demi-demon laughed. Do you really think I'd shoot you and doom myself to eternity in a rotting mortal shell? I am as much your slave as the mortal, and I promise, I shall obey with far less unseemly whining. I rose, the gun still in my hand. I would suggest you keep that, she said. But you'll need to find a place to hide it. I tucked it into the back of my waistband. Whenever I'd seen that on the big screen, I'd rolled my eyes, thinking one wrong move and you're going to shoot yourself in the butt. But, right now, it was the only place I could think of. As I adjusted my shirt over it, my fingers trembled. I took a deep breath. Yes, I know, the demi-demon said. That experience was far from pleasant, but at least he was angry about it. When I glanced over, her brows arched. Would you rather he'd been grateful? Happy to be resurrected? Pleading for a few final minutes with his family. She had a point. I pulled the shirt down one last time, then finger-combed my hair. You look marvelous, my dear, she said, and fluttered her fingers at the door. Shall we? She paused. Let's try that again. Her voice went gruff. Ready to go, kid? I was. 41. As the demi-demon had said, all the major players were in a meeting. Given how loath they were to admit to problems, we hoped they hadn't rushed to tell all the other guards about the death of their colleague, so anyone we encountered wouldn't find it odd to see him escorting the prisoners through the building. As it turned out, the halls were empty. We made it to the security office without seeing or hearing anyone. The door was unlocked. The demi-demon opened it. A guard sat inside, his back to us as he monitored the screens. I stayed behind the demi-demon, but when the guard turned, I caught enough of a glimpse of him for my heart to sink. It was the one who'd been with us earlier. I jerked back out of sight, and I plastered myself to the corridor wall. Hey, Rob, the demi-demon said. Nick, the guard said. His chair scraped the floor, as he scrambled out of it. I thought you were. So did I, the demi-demon said. Seems it takes more than a witch's spell to kill me. Whatever mojo that Shaman Phelps uses, it's good stuff. They called in Phelps. The guard exhaled. I didn't think they would. Dr. Fellows is good, but she's no shaman healer. A lot easier on the eyes than old man Phelps, though. They both laughed at that. Anyway, I'm back in action, and apparently, almost dying doesn't even earn me the rest of the shift off. They want you up front, manning the door. Trudy's nervous with those kids back. I don't blame her. Personally, I don't know why they keep trying to rehabilitate them. After what that brat did to you, I'm ready to lock them up and throw away the key. I'll go keep Trudy company, though. The squeak of shoes, then a sniff. What's that smell? Smell? Like something burned. Yeah. I think Trudy burned popcorn in the microwave again. No, it's not popcorn. Another shoe squeak. It's coming from. A gasp. Then the thump of a falling body. I raced into the room. The demi-demon was tugging the guard into the corner. Do you see a ghost, child? She asked without turning. And no. Then he isn't dead, is he? She arranged him, mostly hidden behind the chairs. Then she took my hands and pressed them to the guard's neck where his pulse beat strong. You're giving me the first chance at freedom I've had. Do you think I'd spoil that? She looked at the guard, then slid a sly glance my way. Still, this would be an excellent opportunity to obtain a far more suitable body for me, one that no one thinks is dead. I glared at her. She sighed. All right then. Find your friends. I scanned the monitors while she watched the door. There was no sign of Tori, but I'd expected that it only meant she was in one of the camera-free cells. I found Simon, still in the surgery, still strapped down, and 4 in his arm, no sign of a guard. I checked the other screens. Dr. Davidoff was in a meeting room with Mrs. Enright, Sue, Mike the security guy, and the 2 others. They were deep in debate. The rest of the rooms were dark, all except one that wasn't any bigger than my walk-in closet at home, crammed with a twin bed, small desk, and chair. Someone sat at the desk, writing, chair pulled as far from camera range as possible. I could see only a shoulder and arm, but I recognized the dark purple silk blouse. I'd been with Aunt Lauren when she bought it this winter. The woman stood, and there was no doubt. It was Aunt Lauren. I brought the demi-demon in and pointed at the screen. What room is that and why is my aunt in there? Because she was naughty. Apparently, distaste for imprisonment runs in the family. She was scarcely confined to a regular cell for a day before she tried to escape. They decided she needed more direct supervision. So she's a captive. She helped you escape. Did you think they'd throw a feast in her honor? Sacrifice a goat or two? They said she'd changed her mind and admitted she made a mistake. The demi-demon laughed. And you believed them? Of course you did, because they've never been anything but perfectly honest with you. My face heated. Yes, they tried to make her see the error of her ways, the demi-demon said. They offered immunity and forgiveness and feather pillows. She's a very valuable member of the team. But she refused. She looked at me and sighed. I suppose you want to rescue her, too. I nodded. Then let's get on with it. I grabbed her arm before she walked away. Ray. The fire half-demon girl. They said she was transferred. Is she here, too? The demi-demon hesitated, and when she spoke, there was a softness in her voice. No, child. She's not here. And I don't know what became of her, so don't ask me. She was here one evening, and come morning, she was not. They killed. There's no time for that. Your friends await and she pointed at the Edison group meeting will not be in there forever. We freed Tori first. I tried to prepare her for the shock of seeing a dead man walking by going in first, but she caught a glimpse of him, and after a split second of surprise, said good idea. I was going to explain that I hadn't created a zombie guard slave, but the demi-demon was already at the next door, checking the third cell, Tori right behind her. I decided that if Tori was fine with me raising the dead for personal use, then there was really no reason to tell her I'd actually made a deal with a demon. That didn't work so well with Simon, who knew I wouldn't be nonchalantly controlling dead people. And I couldn't use the no time to explain excuse because we had time undoing his restraints, getting out his bandaging him, and looking for his shoes, while the demi-demon guarded the door. So I told them the truth. Tori took it in stride. I was beginning to think Tori would take anything in stride. Simon said nothing for a moment, and I braced myself for "Are you nuts?" But this was Simon. He only slid off the bed, crouched beside me while I checked under a table for his shoes, and whispered, "Are you okay?" I knew he meant the part about raising the dead, and when I nodded, he searched my face and said, "All right." I assured him I'd been careful with the demi-demon and he said, "I know, and we'll keep being careful." And that was that. 42. Next stop, dear Auntie Lauren, the demi-demon trilled. Then straight to the nearest exit and she smiled freedom for all. Not all. Tori glanced at me as we walked. We need to download the project files. There are other kids out there thinking they're mentally ill, like Peter and Mila. Plus others who might not have come into their powers yet. Peter had been at Lyle House when I arrived, and he'd been released before we escaped. I hadn't known Mila, only that she'd been there before me, and had been rehabilitated and sent back into the world. I would love to get those files, I said. But we don't have time to access and print. Tori pulled a thumb drive from her pocket. I wasn't even going to ask where that came from. You have Dr. Davidoff's password, she said. We have access to his office. I can download the files while you're getting your aunt. And there's got to be a phone, Simon said. I can try my dad again. They were right. I'd regret it if we left without those names. And I'd regret it even more if we got locked up again and had passed up the chance to tell Mr. B where we were. We got to the office. It needed an additional code, but the demi-demon knew it. Then I said the demi-demon and I would get my aunt and come back. So the sorcerer is staying with his sister, the demi-demon asked. Sister? Simon said. She's not. Sister spellcaster, I said to him quickly. She talks like that. When we were far enough away, I whispered, so Simon's dad really is Tori's father. The worst kept secret in the building. Her sing-song tone jarred with the guard's gruff voice. And that, my child, is saying a lot. Guess that explains why her mom freaked out when Tori admitted she liked Simon. Ooh, that would be awkward. A lesson to you in keeping secrets. They will come back to haunt you in the most uncomfortable ways. Whether that one feels any guilt, though, is quite another matter. She has the morals of a succubus. I must admit, it was quite amusing, watching her attempt to seduce the sorcerer. Quite a blow to her ego when she failed. Failed? I said as we turned the corner. But if Tori is his daughter, then obviously nothing. What do they teach children in school these days? Arguably the most fun, but if that fails, and you have access to a complete laboratory, with every excuse to procure the necessary bodily fluids. That's... An alarm bell clanged right over my head. Time's up, it seems, the demi-demon murmured. She opened the nearest door with the card and propelled me inside, slipping through after me. My aunt is fine. She's only a few doors down, safe for now. You're the pigeon who's not in her coop. The demi-demon led me across the room to a second door, opening into a big closet. She ushered me inside. Simon and Tori are, I presume, in possession of functioning ears and brains. They will hear the alarm and take cover, which is what we need to do. As I stepped into the closet, the guard's body collapsed. I fell to my knees beside it. I believe you'll find he's still quite dead. The demi-demon's voice came from above my head. As useful as that mortal form was, this one is better equipped for sneaking about. I thought you said you couldn't get out of there without my help. Implied, never said. I'm a demon. We know all the loopholes. Now, I'm going to take a look around. You still have that gun, don't you? Yes, but... Take it out and hope you don't need to use it. I'll be right back. A rush of warm air. Then I was alone with the guard's body. The alarm continued to whoop. Did I hear the pounding of running feet? A shout? A shot? Relax. There's nothing you can do. That was the problem. I was stuck cowering in my hidey hole, shaking hands wrapped around a gun that I didn't know how to fire, knowing there was nothing I could do, nothing that wasn't so reckless Derek would have reason to yell at me if he were here, and God how I wished he were. I'd take the yelling just to know he was safe. He is safe. Safer than if he was with you. If he'd been left at the house then, yes, he'd be fine. He had Liz to watch out for him, and he had no idea where we'd gone and no way to come after us. He'd be furious, but safe. I glanced over at the guard. He lay in a heap, dead eyes staring up at me. I thought about him, wondered. Don't think about him. Don't wonder anything. Or you'll get your wish and you won't be alone in this closet. I looked away quickly and erased his image from my head. I checked out the gun instead. I'd written shootouts in screenplays but, to my embarrassment, had no idea whether the gun was loaded or if there was a safety on it. Stuff like that doesn't matter in a screenplay. You just say Chloe fires the gun and leave the rest to the actor and the props department. It looked like a Glock, though, and from what I remembered, they didn't have safeties. Just point and shoot. I could manage that if I had to. See, you're not helpless. You have a weapon. 2 weapons. 2? My gaze slid to the guard and I swallowed hard. No, I'd never. Sure you would, if it came down to it. No, I can't even finish the denial, can you? You'd do it if it was the last resort. Controlling the dead. That's your power. Your greatest power. I squeezed my eyes shut. You can't see anyone coming like that. It took a moment to realize that the voice hadn't come from inside my head. The demi-demon was back. What set off the alarm? I asked. I haven't a clue, but your friends are safe. They've retreated to Davidoff's reading room. The group realizes you've escaped, but, shockingly, they presume you actually tried to get out of the building. Fortunately, you're nowhere near an exit. Unfortunately, we're nowhere near an exit. I can get you out. I may even be able to rescue your aunt on the way. But your friends are in the opposite direction, and I can't possibly. Then I don't go. Not until it's safe for all of us. A noble choice. However, there's only one alternative and I fear you'll like it even less than my last suggestion. Free you. As I said it, my inner voice screamed that I'd been tricked. But I could hear the shouts of the Edison group. They really had been alerted and there was no reason for the demi-demon to do it herself, not when she could have easily escorted us out the door and claimed her reward. Free me and you will cripple the magic's cast on this place, she said. Great. That'll help end the experiments, but how does it get us out? It's not the magic I'm worried about. It's the alarms and guys with guns. What I need is a distraction. And that's what I'm offering. My magic permeates this place. The disruption will affect far more than their spells. You will get the distraction you need. Our plan had failed and she had every reason to lie now and convince me to free her, before I realized I was trapped. I made a bargain, she said. A demon's bargain is binding. Free me and I am bound by my word as tightly as these bonds. Did I trust her? Of course not. Did I have another option? Not one I could see. Tell me what to do. 43. Freeing the demi-demon wasn't much different from freeing a ghost. I suppose that made sense, since she'd gotten here by a type of summoning. Almost there, child, she said, her warm breath swirling around me. I can feel the shackles falling. A quarter-century of servitude and finally I will be free. The very walls will tremble with my leaving, and they'll scurry like frightened mice. Just a little more. Can you feel it? I couldn't feel a thing, just wished she'd shut up and let me concentrate. She let out a cry that made me jump, and the closet filled with whirling hot air. I braced myself. The wind whipped around me, then gradually subsided to a pleasant breeze before disappearing altogether. Silence. Is that it? I said. Do you feel anything else? A vibration, perhaps? No, I glowered in the direction of her voice. You promised to distract. The closet shook. A dull rumble sounded overhead, like a train chugging across the roof. As I looked up, a sudden tremor knocked me off my feet. A ceiling tile hit my shoulder. Then another. The tiny room creaked and groaned and crackled, walls splitting, chunks of dry wall raining down. "Out, child!" the demi-demon shouted to be heard above the din. "You need to get out." I tried to stand, but fell back to all fours. The room kept shaking and creaking, walls groaning as they ripped open. Dry wall dust filled my nose and stung my eyes. I crawled blindly, following the demi-demon's voice as she led me. I made it out of the closet and into the main room. It was shaking just as much, the floor tiles buckling beneath me. A chunk of falling plaster hit my back. Another the size of a fist glanced off my injured arm, shattering as it hit the floor, bits flying into my mouth. As I spat out the plaster, I smelled something other than dry wall dust. A sweet scent, strangely familiar. "Faster," the demi-demon said. "Keep moving." As I crawled, the shaking stopped. The groaning stopped. The room went completely silent and still. I looked around. Dust still filled my eyes, making them water. The floor was carpeted in plaster. The walls were a patchwork of cracks and hanging chunks of dry wall. The room groaned again, softer now, like it was settling, and all that remained was the sweet smell. The demi-demon kept urging me on. I got to my feet. Outside, I could hear the distant shouts and cries of the Edison group. Overhead the light flickered like a strobe, throwing the windowless room into darkness. "You have your distraction," the demi-demon said. "Now take advantage of it." As I stepped toward the door, something brushed my leg. I jumped and looked down. Nothing was there. Another step. Warm fingers stroked my cheek. Hot breath whispered wordlessly in my ear, blowing strands of hair, tickling my neck. "Is that you?" I asked. "Of course," said the demi-demon, from across the room. I looked around. I couldn't see anything except debris. The light continued to flicker. Distant voices shouted about finding the computer tech. "Their systems are down," the demi-demon said. "Perfect. Now go." I started forward. At a giggle to my left, I spun. A growl sounded behind me and I spun again. "The door," the demi-demon said. "Get to the door." A blast of hot air knocked me off my feet, flat onto my back. A giggle erupted above me. Then a low voice, speaking in a foreign language. I pushed up. Another blast slapped me down. Hot air whirled around, dry wall dust flying like a sandstorm, filling my eyes, my nose, my mouth. I crawled toward the door. The wind buffeted me from all sides. That sweet smell, sickly sweet, now made my stomach churn. Invisible hands stroked my head, my back, my face. Fingers plucked my shirt, pulled my hair, pinched my arms. Voices whispered and growled and shrieked in my ears. But the only one that mattered was the demi-demon's, urging me on, guiding me to the door. My head struck the wall. I patted around until I found the doorknob, pulled myself up, and turned it. Yanked. Turned. Yanked. "No," I whispered. "Please, no." Seems those electrical failures might not be so convenient after all. Fingers ran through my hair. Warm breath caressed my cheek. Hot wind whipped around me. The light flickered. "Sweet child," a voice whispered. "What is she?" another asked. "Necromancer." A giggle. "Are you sure? What have they done to her?" "Something wonderful." "Get away from her," the demi-demon said. "She's not yours." "Shoo." All of you. What's going on? I asked. Nothing to worry about, child. It's simply a bit of fallout from the liberation ritual. There are usually precautions taken against such a thing, but we didn't have the time. Or the materials. Precautions against what? Well, when you free a demon, you open a portal into the demon world. Portal is a strong word. More like a teeny tiny tear. The voice continued as we talked. The unseen fingers touched me, poked me. These are demons. I said. Hardly, she said with a sniff. Minor demonic spirits. Little more than pests. She raised her voice. Who are going to be in serious trouble if they don't heed my commands? The spirits hissed and spat and chortled. And stayed where they were. Ignore them, she said. They can't do more than touch you, and they can barely do that. Think of them as an infestation of otherworldly insects. Annoying and inconvenient, but hardly dangerous. They can't manifest in this world without a dead body. She stopped short. We both looked at the closet door. Quickly, she said. Send me back to that guard. If his corpse is occupied, they can't. A thump sounded from the closet. Then a low hiss. I spun and yanked on the exit door. Growls erupted from the closet. As I wailed on the door, I heard a scratching, like nails scraping wood. The click of a knob. The squeak of the door hinges. I spun toward the closet. The lights went out. 44. Fingers brushed my face, making me jump back from the door. Across the room, nails scraped along the floor. He's coming, a voice whispered. The master is coming. Master. I said. They lie, the demi-demon said. It's just another. A wail at my ear drowned her out. I jumped back, knocking over a chair and falling hard. A blast of desert wind whipped my hair in my face, twisting my clothing, binding me. I heard the sounds of struggle, the curses of the demi-demon barely rising over the gibbering and shrieking of the spirits. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. The wind died and the room went silent. Completely dark and completely silent. Are you there? I called. She didn't answer. Instead, I heard the scrape of nails, then the whisper of fabric as it slid across the floor. I leaped to my feet only to tangle in the fallen chair and topple over it, bashing into another piece of furniture. The back of my head cracked against something and the wound from earlier reopened, blood streaming down the back of my head. The scratching stopped, and I heard sniffing. Sniffing and the smacking of lips. I wiped the blood away and scuttled back, thumping into the wall. A chattering, then a hiss, and it went quiet again. I could pick up the distant voices of the Edison group, and I clung to that, a reminder of where I was, in the lab, not locked away in a basement crawl space with dead bodies crawling toward me. Actually, yes, there is a dead body. But it wasn't a rotting corpse. True, it's a nice fresh one, possessed by a demonic spirit. The scraping started again. I wrapped my arms around myself and squeezed my eyes shut. Oh, that'll help. No, but this would. I concentrated on freeing that spirit. I kept at it, as hard as I dared, but that whispering of fabric and scratching of nails kept coming closer, so close now I could hear the scrape of buttons against the floor. I scrambled to a new spot, hit another chair, and crashed down on top of it. Just release it. Stop worrying about getting away. Release it. I closed my eyes. Not that it mattered. The room was so dark I couldn't see a thing, couldn't see the guard's body slithering across the floor, couldn't see how close it was, couldn't see it. Focus. I released and released and released, but it still kept coming, the whispering and the scratching, the hissing and the chattering. I could hear more now, teeth clicking and grinding. And I could smell that sweet demon odor mixing with the stink of burned flesh, making my stomach heave. Concentrate. I did, but no matter how hard I tried, the thing didn't pause, didn't growl or hiss, gave no sign it felt anything. Hot breath seared my ankles. I yanked my knees in and hugged them, blinking hard, desperately trying to see even a shape, but the room was completely dark. Then the scratching and whispering and chattering all stopped, and I knew it was right in front of me. A sharp rip, like fabric tearing. Then another kind of rip, a dull, wet sound that made the whimper die in my throat, and I huddled there, knees drawn tight, listening to that awful wet tearing sound, punctuated by popping, like bones crackling and snapping. I squeezed my eyes shut. Dismiss, dismiss. Something wet and cold flicked across my ankle. I pulled my foot back, hands flying to my mouth, stifling my scream. I leaped to my feet, but icy fingers grabbed my legs and yanked me down. It held me tight, hands climbing up my legs as it pulled itself onto me. I went wild, kicking and punching, but it held me down with superhuman strength, and then it was on me, crouched over me, pinning me, hissing, sickly sweet breath blasting in my face. I felt something cold and wet on my neck. It was licking me, licking the blood. I punched and kicked and imagined releasing it, and for a second felt that iron grip loosen. I heaved and rolled, and managed to get free, scrabbling backward until I hit the wall. I pushed to my feet and tried to run, but tripped over the chair I'd toppled earlier. I caught myself before I fell, then scurried back, expecting any moment the thing would pounce and knock me down. But it didn't, and when I listened I could hear a wet rasping noise where I'd left it. I backed away slowly. With a click, the lights came on, and I saw the guard crouched on all fours, arms and legs bent, wrong, bent where arms and legs shouldn't bend. It looked like some kind of monstrous insect, limbs broken and twisted, bones sticking through fabric. Its head was down and it kept making those wet rasping noises. I stepped to the side and saw what it was doing, licking my blood from the floor. I backed up fast, and it turned its head, completely turned it, the flesh on its neck ripped through, the head swiveling freely. It curled its bloodied lips back, bared its teeth, and hissed. Then it skittered toward me, those broken and twisted limbs moving so fast they seemed to skim the floor, body held only inches above it. I ran for the closet door. With lightning speed it raced into my path. Then it reared up, hissing and spitting. "Release it, child," a familiar voice whispered at my ear. "Why you back?" I looked around, bracing against the pokes and pinches. The others. Gone, and staying gone. Only this one remains. Release it and you'll be done. I've tried. And now I'm here to distract it while you try again. A gust of hot air whooshed between me and the thing, and it reared again, gaze following the wind as the demi-demon whipped past. I closed my eyes. "Your necklace," she said. "Are right." I tugged it off and looked at it, reluctant to put it down. The thing spun on me again. The demi-demon said something in another language, getting its attention. I set the necklace on a chair, within grabbing distance, then closed my eyes and worked at dismissing it. I felt the spirit slipping away, snarling. At a click, my eyes shot open, gaze following the sound to the door. "Yes, it's open," the demi-demon said. "And not a moment too soon. Now finish this." Knowing the door was open gave me the extra boost I needed, and the next sound I heard was a thump as the guard's broken body fell to the floor. "Excellent," the demi-demon said. "Now retrieve your trinket and..." A furnace blast of hot air hit me, so strong it made the others seem like a gentle breeze. What's that?" I said. "Nothing, child," she said quickly. "Now, hurry." 45. I grabbed my necklace and pulled it on as I raced for the door. I was about to veer around the guard's body when it rose, pushing to its feet as if its bones weren't broken in a dozen places. I started around it. "Stop," it thundered. I did. I have no idea why. It was just that kind of voice. I turned to see the guard's body standing straight, chin up, eyes blazing an unearthly green. I could feel the heat radiating off it even from a half-dozen feet away. "Diriel," it roared, peering about the room. Over here, my lord," the demi-demon said. "And may I say, it's a pleasure to see you." He spun in her direction, and when he spoke, his voice was weirdly melodic. Like the demi-demons, only deeper, masculine, hypnotic even. I stood there, rooted to the floor, just listening. "For over 2 decades you have not answered my summons. Where have you been?" "Well, you know, it's a funny story. And I'll be happy to tell you just as soon as I..." "Are you asking me to wait on your convenience?" His voice was low, but it made me shiver in spite of the heat. "Certainly not, sir, but I've made a bargain with this mortal." He wheeled, as if seeing me for the first time. "You made a bargain with a mortal child? Like I said, funny story, and you are going to love. She's a necromancer." He stepped toward me. "That glow. Isn't it pretty? There's such charming variation among these mortal supernaturals. Even the weakest among them gets something, like that lovely glow. A necromancer's glow is indicative of her power." "Quite right, and it's a good thing, too, because being such a weak necromancer, she needs a very strong glow to attract any ghosts." He gave a dismissive snort and walked over to me. I didn't flinch, but only because I was frozen with terror. This was a demon. A full demon. I knew that with a certainty that made my legs quiver. He stopped in front of me and tilted his head, sizing me up. Then he smiled. "So," said the demi-demon Diriel. "I'm just going to help this poor, defenseless necromancer child. Out of the goodness of your heart, I suppose." "Well, no, it seems the silly chit freed me. Completely accidental. You know children, always playing with the forces of darkness. So it seems she's done me a favor, and if you'll let me complete the contract, sir, I will be right with you." How powerful does a child necromancer need to be to free a demi-demon, he mused. "I can feel your power, little one. They've done something to you, haven't they? I have no idea what, but it is wondrous." His eyes gleamed, and I felt them slicing through me as if he were peering into the heart of my power, and when he did, he smiled again, and it made me shiver. "Perhaps, but she's a child, my lord. You know what the Berethian Treaty says about wooing youths. Quite unfair, I agree, but she will be an adult soon enough, and if you allow me to cultivate the child by completing my contract..." He glanced in her direction. "Whatever deal you've made with the child can be completed another time. I'm not letting you slip away again so easily. You have a penchant for disappearing. But she is powerful enough to summon you when she wishes." He turned back to me, and before I could move away, his hand was under my chin, holding it, the guard's dead fingers oddly warm. He tilted my face up to his and murmured, Grow up strong, little one. Strong and powerful. A blast of hot air. Dariel whispered, "I'm sorry, child." And then they were gone. I jumped over the guard's fallen body and raced to the door. The handle turned before I touched it. I looked around, ready to run, but there was no place to run to. I took out the gun and backed against the wall. The door opened. A figure peeked in. Aunt Lauren," I whispered. My knees wobbled. There'd been a time when I'd chafed under Aunt Lauren's constant mothering, but after 2 weeks of relying on myself and other kids who were as scared and lost as I was, her look of concern was like a warm blanket on a freezing night, and I wanted to throw myself into her arms and say, "Take care of me. Fix this." But I didn't. She was the one who ran over and hugged me, and as wonderful as it was, that feeling of wanting to be rescued passed, and I felt myself pulling away and heard myself saying, "Come on. I know the way." As we hurried out, she glanced back in the room and saw the guard's body. She gasped. "Isn't that?" Without missing a beat, I cut her off, stammering, I don't know what happened. I got scared and he just walked in here and..." She hugged me, whispering, "It's okay, hon." She believed me, of course. I was still her little Chloe who'd never think of raising the dead. As we slipped into the hall, she saw the gun and took it from me before I realized what she was doing. When I protested, she said, "If we need to use it, I'll be the one who pulls the trigger." I knew she was trying to protect me from having to shoot someone. I didn't want to shoot anyone, but there was something about giving up the gun that chafed, the feeling of being shoved back into a role I no longer fit. "Simon and Tori are in Dr. Davidoff's office," I whispered. "We'll go this way. It's longer, but we're less likely to bump into anyone." We turned a corner and a balding guard stepped from a room. I tried to tug Aunt Lauren back, but he'd already seen us. "Don't move, Alan," Aunt Lauren said, raising the gun. "Just step back into that room and close." "Alan," said a voice behind him. He turned. A shot fired. The guard dropped. Mrs. Enright stood there, lowering a gun. "I really do hate these things," she said, lifting the gun. "So primitive. But I thought it might come in handy." I glanced at Aunt Lauren. She was frozen in a binding spell. "Look what your aunt did, Chloe." Mrs. Enright waved at the guard, motionless on the ground. "Such a shame. They won't let her off with house arrest this time." I looked from Aunt Lauren to the dead guard. Mrs. Enright laughed. "You're thinking of raising him, aren't you? Such a resourceful girl. I suppose we have you to thank for all this." She waved her free hand at the cracks in the walls. "That's what I like about you. Resourceful, clever, and, apparently," she motioned at the guard again, "getting more confident in your powers each time we meet. I'd almost like to let you raise him, just to see what you'd do. Let us go or..." "I'm the one with the gun, Chloe. Your weapon takes longer to activate. If he so much as twitches, it's goodbye to Aunt Lauren. Any bargains come from me, and I'm still quite willing to deal with you. I think we could." A dark shape leaped on her back. As she fell, she twisted to see a huge black wolf pinning her. She opened her mouth to cast, but Derek grabbed her by the back of the shirt and whipped her against the wall. She recovered, rolling aside and reciting words in a foreign language. He grabbed her and flung her again. She hit with a crack, then lay still. I raced forward. "Chloe!" Aunt Lauren shouted, freed from her binding spell. "It's Derek," I said. "I know. Don't." I was already there, dropping beside him as he panted, flanks heaving, fighting for control. I grabbed handfuls of fur and buried my face against him, tears threatening. "You're okay," I said. I was so worried. "You weren't the only one," said a voice. I glanced up to see Liz and smiled. "Thank you. I just went along for the ride." After that happened, she waved at Derek. "You know how blind people need seeing eye dogs? Well, apparently werewolves could really use opening door poltergeists." Derek rumbled deep in his chest and bumped me. "We need to go." "I know." I started getting to my feet, but he leaned against me. I could feel his racing heart. He pressed his nose against my neck, breathed deeply, shuddered, and his heart slowed. When he sniffed again, his nose went to the back of my neck, finding the blood and grumbling with concern. "It's just a bump," I said. "I'm fine." I wrapped my hands in his fur one last time, holding him tight, then pushed to my feet. I turned to Aunt Lauren. She stood there, staring. Just staring. "We have to go," I said. Her gaze lifted to mine and she stared some more, like seeing someone she didn't recognize. "Liz is here," I said. "She'll scout the way." "Liz," she swallowed, then nodded. "All right." I gestured at Tori's mom. "Is she still alive?" But it was a hard blow. "She should be out for a while." "Good." "Derek? We need to get Tori and Simon. Follow me." "Liz, can you go ahead and make sure the way is clear?" She smiled. "Yes, boss." I took a few steps, then realized Aunt Lauren wasn't following. I turned. She was still staring. "I'm okay," I said. "You are," she said softly. Then firmer, "You really are." We set out. 46. We collected Tori and Simon just as they were heading out to rescue me. After a very brief explanation about the earthquake and the wolf by my side, I asked if Simon had gotten hold of his dad. His face darkened, telling me the answer wasn't good. "Voicemail," he said. "Seriously?" It said he was unavailable and switched to voicemail. I left a message. He could have been out of range or on the phone or... He didn't finish, but we all knew what he meant. Unavailable could mean a lot of things, not all of them as innocent as being stuck between cell towers. "We'll call again as soon as we're out," Aunt Lauren said. "Which should be soon." We headed for the nearest exit. We'd gone about 20 feet before Liz came racing over. "3 of them," she said. "Coming this way." "Guns?" I asked. She nodded. If it was 3 unarmed staff even with supernatural powers, I'd be willing to take them on. But guns were another thing. I told the others. "There's an unused wing to the west," Aunt Lauren said. "They won't guard that exit because it's through a secured door." I followed her and used the keycard to get us into the wing. As soon as we were through, Derek stopped short, the hair on his back rising, lips curling in a silent growl. "Do you smell someone?" I whispered. He shook his head sharply, with a grunt, as if to say sorry, and we started forward again, but he was wary now, gaze flicking from side to side. "I know this place," Simon murmured. "I've been here." "Your dad used to bring you to work sometimes when you were little," Aunt Lauren said. "Yeah, I know, but this place," he looked around, then he rubbed the back of his neck. "Creeps me out, whatever it is." "The exit is around the corner and down at the end," Aunt Lauren said, ushering us on. "It leads into a yard. We'll need to climb the wall, but that's another reason they won't guard it." We continued along. Simon and Derek weren't the only ones getting chills. It was so quiet. An empty, dead place. Shadows hunkered along the walls, out of reach of the security lights. It stunk, too, reeking of antiseptic soaked right into the floors, like an abandoned hospital. I glanced in the first open door and stopped short. Desks. 4 tiny desks. A wall of faded posters of alphabet animals. A blackboard, still showing the ghosts of numbers. I blinked, certain I was seeing wrong. Derek nudged my legs, telling me to get moving. I looked at him, and I looked at the classroom. This was where Derek had grown up. 4 tiny desks. 4 little boys. 4 young werewolves. For a second, I could see them 3 boys working at the 3 clustered desks, Derek alone at the 4th, pushed slightly away, hunched over his work, trying to ignore the others. Derek nudged me again, whining softly, and I looked down to see him eyeing the room, every hair on his neck on end, anxious to get away from this place. I murmured an apology and followed the others. We passed 2 more doors, then Liz came running back. "Someone's coming." "What?" Aunt Lauren said when I relayed it. "From down there?" "That can't be. It's..." The clomp of footsteps cut her off. She looked each way, then waved to the nearest door. "The key card, Chloe, quickly." I opened it and we all tumbled inside. As I closed the door behind us, the lock whirred shut. I looked around, squinting to see with only the glow of an emergency light. We were in a huge storage room packed with boxes. "Lots of places to hide," I whispered. "I suggest we find one." We split up as footsteps echoed down the hall. I turned, nearly tripping over Derek. He hadn't moved, just stared into the room, fur bristling. I looked around. I saw boxes, lots of boxes, but over along the far wall, something else, 4 beds. This was I began. "Where is everyone?" boomed a voice from the hall. Derek snapped out of it, grabbed my sleeve between his teeth, and tugged me deep into the sea of boxes. We found a spot in the back corner where boxes were piled 3 high, leaving a small space for us to hide. Derek nudged me toward it. I whispered for the others as he went back to gather them up. In a minute, we were all wedged in that space, crouched or sitting. Derek stood at the opening, guarding it, ears swiveling. As the steps drew closer, I didn't need his hearing to pick up the voices. "Scientists," a man snorted. "They think they can hire a few rent-a-cop half-demons and they're ready for something like this. Arrogant sons of..." His mutters trailed off. "How close is Mr. St. Cloud?" "His flight will arrive in 75 minutes, sir." "Then we have an hour to clean this mess up." "How many kids was it again?" 4. 3 were recaptured. The 4th the werewolf wasn't, but there was a report that he'd entered the building. "Great. Just great." Their footsteps sounded outside the door. "All right, here's the plan. I need 2 survivors. If you can get me 2, Mr. St. Cloud will be happy. And that doesn't include the werewolf." "Naturally, sir. We need a place to set up a base of operations. The team will be here in 5 minutes. It doesn't look as if they use this wing, sir." A door creaked. "This room even has desks and a blackboard." "Good. Start setting up and get Davidoff on the radio. I want him down here now." I waved for Liz to go check things out. We all strained to listen, praying they'd find some problem with the room or be offered a better one. It didn't happen. "At least they're on the other side of our escape route," Tori said. It doesn't matter, Simon said. We've got a cabal SWAT team setting up down the hall. We're screwed. Liz came running back in. There are 2 guys in suits and one wearing what looks like a soldier's uniform. Plus 4 more like him marching up the hall. The clomping of boots echoed her words. We'll hold tight, I said. They'll send those guys searching hopefully somewhere else. When we get a chance, we'll run. Derek chuffed and slid in behind me, letting me rest against him, so warm and comfortable that I started to relax, and when I did, so did he, muscles softening, heart rate slowing. So you 2 came on your own? I said to Liz. How? Drove. But Derek doesn't have his license. Simon laughed. Doesn't mean we don't know how to drive. Dad let us start last year, bombing around empty parking lots. That's a few minutes at the mall, not 8 hours on the highway. Derek grunted, as if to say it'd been no big deal, though I'm sure it couldn't have been easy. We took Andrew's truck, Liz said. After Derek found his, well, you know. We probably weren't far behind you. I helped navigate. How'd you communicate? Paper and pen. Amazing inventions. Anyway, once we were in Buffalo, I led him here. We couldn't figure out a way in and he got stressed, and apparently that she waved at him is what happens when a werewolf gets stressed. By then, the garage door was open, some staff guy bringing in a car. He took one look at Derek and decided it was time for a new job. Noises sounded in the hall. Liz went to check it out. Behind me, Derek's flank twitched. I rubbed it absently, the muscle jumping under my fingers. Then I asked the question I'd been dreading since Aunt Lauren first found me. Ray's dead, isn't she? I said. Dr. Davidoff said she was transferred, but I know what that means. The same thing it meant with Liz and Brady. The look on Aunt Lauren's face at that moment, I can't describe it, but if I had any doubt about how much she regretted the role she'd played in all this, I saw it as I mentioned their names. For a second she said nothing. Then she jumped, like she'd been startled. Ray? No. Ray isn't dead. Someone broke in and took her. They think it was her mother. Her adoptive mom. Aunt Lauren shook her head. Her birth mother. Jacinda. But Dr. Davidoff said she was dead. We said a lot of things, Chloe. Told a lot of lies, telling ourselves it was better for you all, but really, just because it was easier. If Ray thought her mother was dead, she wouldn't ask for her. From everything I heard, though, they think that's who. Derek's flank twitched again. I glanced down to see a muscle spasming. Another started in his shoulder. When he caught me looking, he growled, telling me it was nothing, just ignore him and pay attention. As Aunt Lauren talked, I rubbed the muscle in Derek's shoulder and he leaned against my hand, relaxing. I knew it wouldn't help. He was ready to change. We need to get going, I said. I'm going to call Liz. She raced through the boxes before I even finished summoning her. Tori's mom had joined the SWAT team in the next room. Apparently, Derek hadn't hurt her as much as I might have hoped. She was nursing a killer headache, and a killer grudge. Derek was to be shot on sight, shot dead, not tranquilized. Reinforcements from a Cabal satellite office were on the way to help sweep the building with manpower and spell power. They were determined to find us before this St. Cloud guy arrived. We're going to have to make a run for it, I said. As soon as it's quiet. Derek convulsed, nearly throwing me off him. Someone doesn't like your plan, Tori said. And just when I was thinking how nice it was that he doesn't have a voice. Won't keep him from arguing apparently. That's not it, I said as Derek convulsed again. He's changing back. Can it wait, because... Derek's whole body spasmed, all four legs shooting out, a back claw nicking Simon, a front paw swatting Tori. They both leaped out of the way. I think that's a no, Simon said. We need to clear out, I said. As you can tell, this requires room. And it might not be something you want to see. Tell them I second that, Liz said. I caught a glimpse, and that was enough. She made a face and shuddered. I shooed them out, then turned to Derek, lying on his side, panting. You've done this alone now, so I guess you don't need. He caught my jeans leg between his teeth, pulling gently, his eyes asking me to stay. I told the others I was, and said if they heard any sign that the SWAT team was searching this hall, they were to get out all of them. We aren't leaving you too, Simon said. Derek growled. He's agreeing with me, I said. For once. You have to go. With any luck, they'll presume that means Derek and I are someplace else. Simon didn't like it, but he only grumbled for Derek to hurry. Aunt Lauren stayed after they'd gone. If anything happens, you're coming with us, Chloe. Derek can look after. No, he can't. Not like this. He needs me. I don't care. I do. He needs me. So I stay. We locked gazes. Again, a look passed through her eyes, surprise and maybe a little bit of grief. I wasn't her little Chloe anymore. I never would be again. I walked over and hugged her. I'm fine. I know. She hugged me back, fierce and tight, then left to join the others. 47. Derek's change came faster now and maybe a bit easier, no vomiting this time. Finally it was over, and he fell onto his side, panting, shaking, and shivering. Then he reached for my hand, holding it tight, and I entwined my fingers with his, shifting closer and using my free hand to brush sweaty hair from his face. Whoa, a voice said, making both of us jump. Simon stood in the entrance to our corner, a pile of fabric in his hands. You really need to get dressed before you start that. I'm not starting anything, Derek said. Still, he held out the stack in his hands. Dr. Fellows dug up some hospital greens for you. Get dressed and then, whatever. We weren't, I began. Have you still got my note? I nodded. Give it to him. I pulled the folded page from my pocket and handed it to Derek. When he was busy with it, Simon let the smile fall from his face as he studied his brother. Is he okay? He mouthed. I nodded. I passed Derek the scrubs as he refolded the note, then turned away to let him dress. We good? Simon asked. Yeah. Derek lowered his voice. A squeak of shoes as Simon turned to go. Derek called him back, grunting with effort as he rose, his bare feet padding over. A short, murmured conversation. Then the slap of Simon smacking Derek's back, and his footsteps retreated. A whisper of fabric as Derek dressed. Then a hand on my waist, a light touch, tentative. I turned and Derek was right there, his face above mine, hands sliding around me as I tilted my face up. What the? We both jumped again. Tori stood there, staring at us, Simon behind her, grabbing her arm. I told you not to, Simon began. Yeah, but you didn't say why. I sure didn't expect, she shook her head. Am I the last one to know everything around here? Liz raced in. What's going on? Derek's ready, I said. We need to move. We had one gun, 1 werewolf, 1 poltergeist, 1 supercharged spellcaster, 1 not so supercharged spellcaster, and 1 perfectly useless necromancer, though Liz was quick to remind me that she needed me to relay her words. Our plan, though, involved something much simpler than a supernatural showdown. We were falling back on the advice Derek's dad had given him for dealing with a significantly stronger opponent: run. While Liz watched the operations room, we'd try to make it to the exit door. If we failed, that's when the gun, werewolf, poltergeist, and spellcasters would come into play. According to Liz, there were 5 people in that room: Mrs. Enright, Dr. Davidoff, the head suit, his assistant, and 1 SWAT guard. They seemed to be staying put, manning the war room while the employees searched. Every now and then, one of those employees would pop in for an update or orders. We just had to pray that didn't happen during the few minutes it'd take us to get to the door. As we coordinated a what-if plan of attack, Derek stood beside me. Aunt Lauren kept giving us weird looks. We weren't doing anything to earn them, but she kept glancing over and frowning. Finally she said, "Derek? Can I speak to you?" He stiffened and glanced at me, as if to say, "What does she want?" "We don't have time to," I began. "It'll just take a second. Derek? Please." She waved him across the room. Tori and Simon were arguing about spells and Liz was in the hall, so no one else noticed. Aunt Lauren said something to Derek. Whatever it was, he didn't like it, his gaze shooting to me as he scowled and shook his head. Was she telling him to stay away from me? I could hope that today she'd seen he wasn't dangerous, maybe even seen how I felt about him, but I guess that was too much to hope for. I wanted to march over and interrupt, but before I could, Derek stopped arguing. He eased back, head bent, hair hanging forward, deep in thought. Then he gave a slow nod. She reached out and took his arm, leaning in to say more, her face taut with urgency. He kept his gaze down, nodding. I told myself he was just saying whatever she wanted to hear so we could get out of here, but I'll admit I felt a lot better when he walked straight to me, rumbling, "You ready?" We stepped aside as Aunt Lauren got Simon and Tori. "Was she telling you to stay away from me?" I asked. He paused, then said, "Yeah." He squeezed my hand out of Aunt Lauren's sight. "It's okay. We're good." We headed for the hall. Our biggest worry had been the loud click of the door lock, but Derek listened and motioned for me to open it while the men were talking. Then Derek took the lead, in case anyone came in through the exit door. I was behind him, Simon behind me, Tori and Aunt Lauren following. Those 30 feet seemed like 30 miles. I longed to bolt for the door, throw it open, and be gone, but we had to move silently, which meant excruciatingly slowly. We'd gone about 10 feet when someone in the war room said, "We have a breach, sir." "A perimeter spell." "Where?" Derek picked up speed, just a little. "Hold on," the man said. "It seems to be right outside." "Chloe." Aunt Lauren's loud whisper floated through the halls. I spun to see her jogging the other way toward the room where the Edison team and the Cabal guys were. She called my name again, like she was searching for me. My mouth opened. A hand clamped over it, an arm going around my chest, holding me still, Derek's voice in my ear, whispering, "I'm sorry." "I think I hear them," Dr. Davidoff said. "Chloe." Aunt Lauren ran full out now, shoes slapping the linoleum. "Chloe." She wheeled into their room and let out a yelp. "Hello, Lauren," Tori's mom said. "Lost your niece again?" She cast a binding spell, freezing my aunt. "I see you still have that gun." Let me take that, before you kill someone else. As I struggled, Derek waved for the others to keep going. I vaguely saw Simon and Tori pass me as Derek scooped me up and started for the exit, and I knew this was what Aunt Lauren had told him to do, what he'd tried to argue against. If there was trouble, she'd sacrifice herself to save us. His job was to get me out of there. I twisted my head to see Mrs. Enright holding the gun on Aunt Lauren, still frozen. Time to rid ourselves of a very inconvenient. A gun, Diane, a man's voice called. Guess your charm isn't the only power you underestimate. A man stepped around the corner. He was about my dad's age, a couple of inches shorter than Mrs. Enright, slender, with silvering black hair. He was smiling, and it was a smile I knew well, even if I'd never seen this man before. Dad! Simon shouted, skidding to a halt. 48. Mr. B lifted a hand, waving casually, like he'd walked in on us sitting around chatting. I struggled and Derek released me. Hello, Kit, Mrs. Enright said. She turned the gun on him. He tsked. Is that really the impression you want to make, Diane? Prove to everyone here that a witch needs a gun to fight a sorcerer. She lowered the gun and raised her hand instead, fingers sparking. There, he said. That's better. Now come on over and show me how much you missed me. She cast an energy bolt. Mr. Bay's hand flew out and her bolt stopped short, exploding in midair. The guard advanced on Aunt Lauren, gun pointed, now that the binding spell on her was broken. Simon lunged forward, but his father motioned for him to run. Simon kept going. Derek caught his shoulder. He looked down at me, then from the door to his father, caught between the impulse to protect him or protect us. Fight, I whispered, and it was all I needed to say. Derek released Simon and pushed me toward the door. Tori locked the guard in a binding spell and yelled for Aunt Lauren to follow me. My aunt sprang up and grabbed the guard's gun and hit him in the head with it as Derek plowed into Dr. Davidoff, sending him flying. Tori cast another spell, then another. I don't know what they were, only that the walls started to shake. The cracks from earlier yawned wider. Plaster rained down. I wanted to do something, anything, but Derek saw me and shouted for me to get back. Then one of the men in a suit hit him with a spell, knocking him forward before his dad slammed an energy bolt into the guy. I stayed where I was, knowing that as much as I wanted to help, I'd only put everyone else in danger trying to protect me. The building continued to shake, weakened walls and ceiling cracking. White dust rained down, enveloping everyone, and I could catch only glimpses through it, snapshots of the action. Tori facing off with her mom. Liz running toward Mrs. Enright, a broken plank in her hand. The guard lying unconscious under everyone's feet. Derek tackling the main suit, his dad, and Simon taking on the other. Aunt Lauren standing over Dr. Davidoff, gun at the back of his head. Then, with an ear-splitting crack, the ceiling gave way. Huge chunks of plaster and broken wood crashed down. Boxes and crates and filing cabinets toppled through from the attic. The ceiling kept ripping and cracking, and I looked up to see it splitting right over my head. Derek shouted. He hit me, knocking me to the floor and pinning me beneath him as the rest of the ceiling collapsed. When the hall finally stopped rumbling, I heard Mr. B calling for Derek. Here, Derek said. With Chloe. He moved off me and helped me up. I rose, coughing and blinking. I could make out Simon and Mr. B safe in the room where we'd hidden earlier. Tori. I heard Liz saying. Tori. I squinted and moved toward her voice. Derek still gripped my arm, staying close. Liz was hunched over Tori. Tori! I yelled. She lifted her head, brushing a hand over her face. I am okay. As she got up, I looked around frantically for Aunt Lauren. Then I saw her, stirring under a pile of rubble between me and Tori. I leaped forward, but Derek pulled me back. Stay there, guys, Mr. B said. Tori. He paused, and when I looked over, he was staring at her, like he'd only just seen her now, really seen her. Dad! Simon said. Mr. B shook off the surprise and said, slowly, Tori? Head toward me. That ceiling doesn't look good. I glanced up. Broken timbers and huge pieces of plaster swayed overhead. Boxes teetered on the edge. Tori looked around. The guard and two guys in suits were almost buried under the rubble. Dr. Davidoff lay on his stomach, not moving. Beside her lay another body, her mother, her eyes open, staring up. Ding dong, the witch is dead, Tori said. She swayed. Then she made a weird, strangled hiccuping noise, shoulders hunching. Mom! Tori? Han! Mr. B called. I need you to come over here, okay? Aunt Lauren, I said. She's caught. I've got it, Tori said, wiping her sleeve over her face. She bent and started pulling pieces off my aunt. A plank flew up from the pile behind Tori. Dr. Davidoff's eyes were open, mentally guiding it. I opened my mouth to scream a warning and Liz raced to grab it, but it swung down, hitting Tori in the back of the head. She fell face first to the rubble. Aunt Lauren scrambled up, pushing the last pieces of plaster aside. Then she stopped. Dr. Davidoff rose behind her, gun pressed to the back of her neck. Liz grabbed the plank he'd hit Tori with, but he saw it move and said, "No, Elizabeth." He swung the gun toward Tori. "Not unless you'd like some company in the afterlife." Liz dropped the wood. Dr. Davidoff moved the gun back to Aunt Lauren. "Pick that board up again, please, Elizabeth, and move in front of me, so I can see where you are." She did. "Now, Kit, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to take your boys and go." The modifications appear to have succeeded with Simon. As strong as Derek is, he seems normal for a werewolf. Another success. Chloe and Victoria are the problems, but I assure you, they'll be well cared for. Take your boys and... "I'm not going anywhere," Derek said. "Not without Chloe." He stiffened, like he expected me to argue, but I barely heard them talking. My blood roared in my ears, stomach churning, knowing what I had to do, fighting to get past every instinct that screamed against it. Dr. Davidoff's eyes lifted to Derek. He frowned, assessing, then nodded. "So be it. I won't turn down the opportunity to keep our only werewolf subject. Take your son, then, Kit." "I'll take both my sons," Mr. B said. "And Victoria and Chloe and Lauren." Dr. Davidoff chuckled. "Still don't know when to cut your losses, do you? I'd think 10 years on the run would have taught you a lesson. Think of everything you gave up, just because I wanted Derek back. I'm sure Simon would have been a lot happier if you hadn't been so stubborn." "Stubborn's good," Simon said. "And it runs in the family. I'm not leaving until you give them up, too." Derek rubbed the back of my shoulders, mistaking the tightness for fear, not concentration. Simon cast an anxious glance my way as sweat poured down my face. I closed my eyes and focused. "Go, Chloe," Aunt Lauren said. "Just go." "That's not how it works," Dr. Davidoff said. "I can shoot you and Tori before Kit or Derek can take me down." Make up your mind, Kit. There's a cabal team on the way, if they haven't already arrived. Cut your losses and go. A shape rose behind Dr. Davidoff. Derek sucked in a breath, then slowly released it and whispered under his breath, encouraging me. Simon and Mr. B quickly looked away so Dr. Davidoff wouldn't turn around. You only have a few minutes, Kit, Dr. Davidoff said. Pick up the gun, I said. He laughed. Your aunt knows better than to dive for a gun 10 feet away, Chloe. Dr. Davidoff, I said. Yes. Shoot him. He frowned, mouth opening. Mrs. Enright's corpse swayed. Her eyes met mine, rage-filled eyes. I said. She fired. Dr. Davidoff hung there, mouth working, hole through his chest. Then he dropped. I squeezed my eyes shut and released Mrs. Enright's soul. When I opened them, Aunt Lauren was crouched beside Dr. Davidoff, fingers to his neck. His ghost stood beside her, staring, confused. He's gone, I said. I see his spirit. Someone shouted. Boots clomped in the distance. We have to go, Mr. B said. Lauren. I'm fine. Derek, grab Tori and follow me. We raced out the door just as shouts echoed behind us. Mr. B yelled for Simon and Aunt Lauren to get over the wall, as he boosted me and Derek carried Tori. I got to the top, then crouched beside Simon, the two of us helping Derek as Liz ran ahead, shouting the all clear. As we climbed down, Mr. B stood atop the wall, ready to shoot spells at anyone who came out. But no one did. The rubble and the bodies slowed them down long enough for us to get away. By then, Tori was conscious and we ran, all of us, as far and as fast as we could. 49. Mr. Bay's van was parked a mile away in a shopping mall. He'd bought it a month ago, using faked paperwork, so it couldn't be traced back to him, and it looked like he'd been living in it. He threw his sleeping bag and a cooler into the back, and we all climbed in. I don't know where we ended up. Pennsylvania, I think. No one asked. No one cared. It was a really long, really quiet drive. I was in the back with Aunt Lauren, and even though I noticed Derek glancing back at me anxiously every now and then, I soon fell asleep to the murmur of Simon and his dad in the front seat. I woke up when Mr. B pulled into a roadside motel. He got 2 rooms and we split up, guys going in one, girls in the other. Mr. B said he'd order pizza for us all and then we'd talk. Aunt Lauren said not to rush. No one was hungry, and I'm sure the guys wanted some alone time with their dad. Liz and Tori seemed to figure I needed alone time with Aunt Lauren, too. Liz took off, saying she was going to wander and she'd be back by morning. Tori said her stomach was queasy from the long drive, so she was going to sit outside for a while to get some fresh air. Aunt Lauren asked her to go behind our unit, so no one driving past could see her. That's when it really hit me, we weren't going home, not yet anyway. And we'd have to get used to always thinking about stuff like that, about who might be watching. I sat beside Aunt Lauren on the bed, and she put her arm around my shoulders. How are you doing? She asked. Okay. What happened back there, at the lab? She didn't finish. I knew what she meant, killing Dr. Davidoff. And I knew that if I mentioned it, she'd tell me I hadn't actually killed him. But I had. I wasn't sure how I felt about that, only that Aunt Lauren wouldn't be the person I'd talk to about it, because she'd only try to make me feel better, not help me work through it. For that, I'd need Derek, so I just said, I'm okay. Then, I know I can't go home right now, but I want Dad to know I'm okay. I'm not sure that's. He has to know. Even if he can't know about the necromancer stuff and the Edison group stuff. He has to know I'm safe. She wavered for a moment, but seeing my expression, she finally nodded. We'll find a way. When I found Tori out back, she was just sitting there, like that night at the warehouse when her dad betrayed her. Sitting there, staring into space, hugging her knees. This had to be so hard for her. The guys got their dad back, I got Aunt Lauren back. And Tori? She'd watched her mother die. No matter how horrible Mrs. Enright had been, no matter how much Tori had come to hate her, she'd still been her mother. Tori wasn't alone here. She still had a parent, a biological one anyway, but I was sure Mr. B wouldn't be too quick to tell her. That would be too weird, like saying, sorry you lost one parent, but here's a replacement. I sat down beside her. I'm sorry about your mom, I said. A short, bitter laugh. Why? She was an evil, murdering. But she was your evil, murdering. Tori gave a choked laugh, then nodded. A tear slid down her cheek. I wanted to put my arm around her, but I knew she'd hate that, so I just moved closer, bumping against her. She tensed and I thought she was going to move away, but then she relaxed, leaning against me. I could feel her body shaking as she cried. She didn't make a sound, though, not even a whimper. A huge shadow rounded the corner. Derek stepped out, head tilted to catch the wind. His lips twitched when he saw me, curving into a crooked smile. Hey, he said. I thought I. Tori lifted her head and wiped her eyes on her sleeve, and Derek shut up. Sorry, he said gruffly and started to retreat. That's okay, she said, getting to her feet. My pity session is over. You can have her now. As she walked away from us back to our room, Derek stood there, looking uncertain again. Anxious again. I waved for him to sit beside me, but he shook his head. Can't right now, he said. Dad sent me to find you. I went to get up, but my foot was asleep and I stumbled a bit. Derek caught me and didn't let go. He bent, like he was going to kiss me, then stopped. Was he always going to do that? I almost teased him about it, but he looked so serious, I didn't dare. Your aunt, he said. Did she say anything about your plans? No. Once more he leaned down to me, then stopped again. Didn't she say anything? Like whether you're going home or not? I'm not. As long as that cabal is still out there, we can't. I suppose we'll stay with you guys, if that's what your dad has in mind. Probably safest. He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath, and I finally understood why he was so anxious. Now that we'd escaped the Edison group and were back with our families, he thought that meant we'd go our separate ways. I'm definitely hoping we'll stay with you guys, I said. Me, too. I slid closer, feeling his arms close around me, tightening. Our lips touched. Derek, his dad called. Chloe. Derek let out a growl. I laughed and backed up. We seem to get a lot of that, don't we? I said. Too much. After we eat, we're going for a walk. A long walk. Far from every possible interruption. I grinned up at him. Sounds like a plan. Speaking of plans, Mr. B had plenty. Over pizza he confirmed what I expected, we needed to go on the run again, this time from the cabal. So everything we did back there, at the lab, it didn't do any good. I said. Probably only the cabal off, Tori muttered. No, it helped, Mr. B said. The Edison Group won't recover from this anytime soon, and it'll take some time for the cabal to sort through everything and plan a search. Fortunately, being a cabal, they've got a lot on their to-do list, and we won't be at the top. You're valuable, and they'll want you back, but we'll have some breathing room. He glanced at my aunt. Lauren? Living on the run may not be what you had in mind, but I'm going to strongly suggest you and Chloe come with us. We should stick together. Derek looked at me, tensing, like he was ready to jump in with arguments if Aunt Lauren disagreed. When she said, that would be best, he relaxed. So did I. Simon grinned and shot me a thumbs up. I looked over at Tori. She seemed to be holding herself as still as she could, her face rigid, not giving anything away. And Tori will come with us, right? I said. Of course. Mr. B smiled at her. I suppose I should make sure that's okay with her, though. Will you stay with us, Tori? She nodded, and slid a half-smile my way. We'll need to lie low for a while, Mr. B said. I have a few ideas of places we can go. Simon says Tori got a list of the other subjects. We'll make contact with them. They have to know what was going on, and what happened. We'll look for Ray, too. If she's with her mom, that's good, but we'll want to make sure of that. We don't want anyone left behind. It was overwhelming, but it felt weirdly good, too, knowing we weren't alone, knowing we could help the others. We had a lot of work ahead of us, but a lot of adventures, too. I was sure of that. Derek and I went out for our walk after dinner. Alone. There was an open field behind the motel and we headed there. Finally, when we were far enough from the motel, Derek led me into a little patch of woods. He hesitated then, unsure, still just holding my hand. When I stepped in front of him, though, his free hand went around my waist. So, I said. Seems you're going to be stuck with me for a while. He smiled. A real smile that lit up his whole face. Good, he said. He pulled me against him. Then he bent down, breath warming my lips. My pulse was racing so fast I could barely breathe. I was sure he'd stop again and I tensed, waiting for that hesitation, stomach twisting. His lips touched mine, and still I kept waiting for him to pull back. His lips pressed against mine, then parted. And he kissed me. Really kissed me, arms tightening around me, mouth moving against mine, firm, like he'd made up his mind that this was what he wanted and he wasn't backing down again. I slid my arms around his neck. His tightened around me and he scooped me up, lifting me off my feet, kissing me like he was never going to stop, and I kissed him back the same way, like I didn't want him to ever stop. It was a perfect moment, one where nothing else mattered. All I could feel was him. All I could taste was his kiss. All I could hear was the pounding of his heart. All I could think about was him, and how much I wanted this, and how incredibly lucky I was to get it, and how tight I was going to hold onto it. This was what I wanted. This guy. This life. This me. I was never getting my old life back, and I didn't care. I was happy. I was safe. I was right where I wanted to be. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.